The afternoon light over San Francisco shimmered like liquid glass. From the terrace of the Azure Garden Café, the skyline stretched upward, mirrored towers slicing through the clouds, their reflections rippling across the bay below. Between the rhythmic hiss of the fountains and the murmur of conversation, the place felt suspended in its own world, elegant, untouchable, and perfectly rehearsed. Every table was occupied. Waiters glided like dancers between rows of white linens, balancing trays of espresso, croissants, and plates of vibrant Mediterranean dishes. Laughter drifted across the air, blending with the faint music of a nearby violinist. It was the kind of day where the city's elite came to be seen, bankers, influencers, and politicians all basking beneath the warmth of perfection. And in the center of it all sat Elias Voss, the man who had built half the skyline. He was 72, but his posture carried the calm command of a younger man. His silver hair gleamed beneath the sun, his tailored suit unwrinkled despite the breeze. The gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose reflected not just wealth, but distance. He had been a builder of empires, a visionary who turned ruins into skylines and dreams into assets. Yet lately, the spark in his eyes had dulled, buried beneath years of negotiations, betrayals, and the heavy cost of being worshipped by a world that secretly wanted to see him fall. Across from him sat Celeste, his wife of 3 years, a woman so stunning that strangers often mistook her for a film star. Her porcelain skin caught the light in soft hues of ivory, her raven hair framed a face that seemed sculpted from the same ambition that once drove Elias. But behind her red lips and flawless poise hid something colder, a vacancy, as if the warmth in her eyes had long since been traded for diamonds. "Darling, you're distracted again," Elias said quietly, setting down the menu. His voice was calm but weary, like an old song replayed too often. Celeste smiled, though it never reached her eyes. "I'm right here," she murmured, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her hand rested on his, light as silk but hollow of feeling. "You know I love these lunches. There are little escapes from the world." He studied her for a moment, searching for sincerity, and found only reflection, the image of a woman rehearsed in affection. But Elias said nothing. Silence had become his chosen peace. Beyond the patio rail, Noah Raines stood among the shadows. He couldn't have been more than 12, yet the years had aged him in ways no calendar could measure. His hoodie was 2 sizes too large, its fabric torn and faded. His sneakers had long since lost their soles. A small duffel bag hung over his shoulder, clinking faintly with the sound of collected cans, his day's work, his night's survival. He'd been watching the cafe since morning, not for kindness but for food. Sometimes a server might toss him leftovers, or a kind stranger would slip $1 into his hand. But today, the tables seemed filled with people who never looked beyond their plates. Noah's stomach growled softly. He pressed a hand against it and leaned closer to the wrought iron fence. From his vantage point, he could see the glittering plates, the gold spoons, the effortless laughter of people who lived in another world. His gaze fell on Elias's table, 2 bowls of steaming soup, one untouched. His lips parted slightly. Just a few crumbs, maybe bread if he was lucky, and he could make it through the night. Then he noticed something strange. Celeste's hand slipped into her designer handbag. Her eyes flicked toward Elias, who was now absorbed in his phone, answering messages with mechanical grace. The faintest movement, a twist of her wrist, a flick of her fingers. Noah squinted. In her hand glimmered a small glass vial, its contents clear as water. She opened it swiftly, tilting it over the steaming bowl before her husband. A single drop fell. Then another. The liquid disappeared instantly into the broth. Noah froze. The world around him blurred, the clinking of cutlery, the hum of conversation, the faint laughter of the wealthy, all dissolved into a muffled haze. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. He blinked once, twice, trying to convince himself he was wrong. But the look on her face told him otherwise. Calm. Composed. Deceptively perfect. Celeste stirred the soup lightly, her spoon tracing circles in the broth, then leaned forward and whispered something that made Noah's blood run cold. After all the trouble I've gone through, you won't ruin this now. Elias smiled faintly, not catching the venom in her tone. You always worry too much, he said, glancing at the steaming bowl before him. Noah's breath caught. His mind raced in circles. He didn't know these people. He didn't even know if what he'd seen was real. But every instinct screamed that something was wrong. He wanted to run, to pretend he hadn't seen anything. But when Elias lifted his spoon, time seemed to stop. The boy gripped the fence. His palms were sweaty. His chest ached from holding his breath. The spoon inched closer to the old man's lips. The cafe carried on, waiters moving, laughter floating, the violin singing its lonely song. No one else saw. No one else cared. And in that moment, Noah made a decision that would change everything. He stumbled forward through the open gate, nearly tripping over the stone path. His voice broke through the air, sharp and desperate, echoing across the cafe like a thunderclap. Don't eat that. Every head turned. The violin stopped. A fork clattered to the floor. Even the fountain seemed to hush. Elias froze mid-motion, the spoon suspended inches from his mouth. His eyes darted to the trembling boy who stood by the table, chest heaving, hands shaking. What did you just say? Celeste demanded, her face tightening, her voice cutting like glass. Noah swallowed hard. Please, sir, he said, his voice cracking. Don't. Eat it. She put something in your soup. The cafe erupted in gasps. Conversations died. Every patron turned toward the scene, eyes wide, breaths caught between disbelief and curiosity. Celeste's expression hardened, the mask of charm melting into fury. You filthy little liar, she hissed. How dare you accuse me of something so vile? Who even let you in here? Noah didn't back down. His knees trembled, but his eyes held steady. I saw you, he whispered, voice trembling but true. You poured something in when he wasn't looking. For the first time in years, Elias felt fear. His hand lowered the spoon slowly. He looked at his wife, at the smooth perfection of her face, and saw, beneath the surface, something he had refused to acknowledge, a stranger. Celeste, he said softly, his tone carrying both disbelief and warning. What is he talking about? The air thickened. A hush fell like fog. Noah stood there, just a boy with nothing but his voice, facing a woman dressed in diamonds, a man who owned skyscrapers, and a crowd that had never once looked at him. But in that moment, the invisible had become seen. And before the next word was spoken, the world had already begun to change. For a moment that felt like an eternity, the Azure Garden Café hung between breath and disbelief. The faint hum of the fountains vanished beneath the weight of silence. Every eye fixed on the trembling boy who had dared to speak, a thin shadow standing against the empire of luxury. Elias Voss lowered his spoon slowly, the edge of the silver trembling against the bowl. What did you say? He asked again, softer this time, his voice more curiosity than anger. Noah Rain swallowed hard. His throat was dry, his palms slick with fear. Yet he forced the words out, his voice breaking but clear. "She put something in your soup, sir. I saw it. She poured it when you looked at your phone." Gasps rippled through the terrace like wind through glass. Cups froze halfway to lips. Chairs creaked as people turned to stare at Elias Voss, who stood motionless for a heartbeat, her face caught between shock and fury. Then, like a mask cracking under pressure, she laughed. Soft at first, then sharper. "Oh, how charming," she said, her tone coated in sugar. A street child's imagination. "Elias, please, tell them this is absurd." But Elias didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the boy, studying him. There was something raw in Noah's face, something untouched by manipulation or deceit. Hunger, yes. Fear, yes. But lies? No. Elias had spent his life reading people, partners, competitors, presidents. And right now, his gut whispered the one thing he didn't want to believe. The boy was telling the truth. Celeste's laugh faltered when she saw the change in his expression. "Elias," she said sharply, "don't tell me you're actually listening to this nonsense." He turned to her, calm but steady. "Then tell me, Celeste. What was in your hand?" For a moment, her composure slipped. Her eyes darted to the handbag beside her, then back to him. "My perfume," she said quickly. "You know how clumsy I am. I probably spilled a drop." "A perfume that needs stirring into my food," he interrupted quietly. Her face tightened. "You're humiliating me." Elias pushed his chair back slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "And you're avoiding the question." The air thickened again, tension coiling like a living thing. The waiter who'd been frozen near the bar finally took a hesitant step forward. "Sir, is everything all right?" Elias didn't answer him either. His hand hovered above the bowl. The once inviting steam now looked sinister, the aroma sharp, almost metallic. He had spent a lifetime trusting his logic, now even his senses betrayed him. Could it be? After all he'd done for her, the gifts, the charity, the estate on the bay, could Celeste truly want him gone? Across the table, Celeste's beauty seemed to harden into something glacial. "You're letting a vagrant embarrass me," she hissed under her breath, low enough for only him to hear. "He's after attention, maybe a handout. Don't ruin our lunch over this nonsense." But Elias's silence spoke louder than her defense. Noah felt every second stretch across his chest like a tightening rope. He wanted to run, he could feel the judgment in every stare, the disgust of the wealthy guests who saw him as nothing but trouble. Yet he stood his ground. Because he had seen it, the vial, the liquid, the quiet tilt of her wrist. He couldn't unsee it now. Celeste's hand darted toward the bowl suddenly, but Elias caught her wrist mid-motion. The café collectively gasped. "Enough," he said softly, but his grip was iron. "If you didn't do anything wrong, you won't mind if someone else examines it." Celeste froze. Her eyes widened, not in innocence, but in calculation. For the first time, Elias saw the woman behind the beauty, cunning, restless, afraid. Her voice came out cold. And clipped. "This is beneath you. Truth rarely lives above us," Elias murmured. He raised a hand to the waiter. "Call security. Or the police." The word police cracked through the air like a whip. Celeste's veneer shattered. "You can't be serious," she snapped, pulling her hand free. "Elias, you're humiliating yourself." But it was too late. Every patron had become a witness. The café that once hummed with conversation now pulsed with whispers. Noah's knees wobbled. He took a step back, half wishing he could disappear. He had done what he came to do, now fear flooded in to replace courage. Would they blame him? Would the woman make him pay somehow? He'd lived long enough to know that the truth didn't always protect the poor. Elias noticed the boy retreating. "Stay," he said gently, his voice shifting from command to gratitude. "Whatever happens next, you stay." The kindness in his tone steadied Noah's shaking hands. For the first time, someone had spoken to him not as a nuisance, but as a person. A few minutes later, 2 security officers appeared at the patio gate, their radios crackling softly. The lead guard approached cautiously. "Mr. Voss. Is there a problem?" Elias gestured toward the bowl. "There might be something in this soup that shouldn't be there." Celeste crossed her arms tightly. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Madam," the guard interrupted politely, "we'll just need to secure it." Her face blanched. The guard lifted the bowl, and for a second, Celeste's hand twitched, a small, involuntary movement, but Elias caught it. His stomach twisted. Noah's voice broke the quiet again. "It was clear liquid," he said softly. "Like water." But she poured it fast, and she looked, scared. "Scared?" Elias repeated. Noah nodded. Like someone who'd already made up their mind. The simplicity of the sentence hit harder than accusation. It was the kind of truth only innocence could deliver, unpolished, unfiltered, undeniable. Celeste turned on him with fury. "You think anyone will believe you? You're nothing. You live off scraps, and you dare to talk about me?" Noah's shoulders straightened. His fear was still there, but something else had begun to grow behind it, quiet defiance. "I don't care if they believe me," he said, his voice trembling but fierce. "I just didn't want him to die." The line cut through the murmurs like lightning through fog. Elias's throat tightened. For decades, he had been surrounded by people who only spoke when they had something to gain. Yet this boy, hungry, trembling, alone, had spoken up with nothing to gain and everything to lose. And in that realization, something inside Elias shifted. A faint, nearly forgotten ache, the kind that comes from seeing goodness where the world swore there was none. Celeste turned away, her gaze darting toward the exit. "I'm not staying here for this circus," she said, grabbing her bag. Elias's voice stopped her cold. "You won't leave." The words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of an empire. He stood slowly, the years seeming to melt off his frame as authority returned to his posture. "You wanted freedom, Celeste. You'll have it, just not in the way you imagined." The guards exchanged glances. The second officer muttered into his radio, calling for the police. As Celeste's breath quickened, she turned her glare back on Noah, that small, stubborn boy who had dared to speak the truth. "You'll regret this," she whispered. Noah met her eyes, scared but unyielding. "I already regret not having breakfast," he said quietly. A few people laughed nervously. Even Elias couldn't suppress the faint curl of a smile. The innocence of the line made it almost tragic. Minutes later, the faint sound of sirens began to rise beyond the hills. Elias stepped closer to Noah, lowering his voice. "What's your name?" "Noah," he said softly. "A good name," Elias murmured. "Means, rest after storm. Maybe that's what today will bring." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Gentle, fatherly. For the first time in years, Elias Voss didn't feel like the richest man in the city. He felt like a man saved by grace he hadn't earned. And as the sirens drew nearer, the glass sky above the café seemed to darken slightly, as if the heavens themselves were waiting to hear the truth. The wail of approaching sirens seemed to slice through the delicate rhythm of lunchtime San Francisco. Moments earlier, the Azure Garden Café had been a temple of serenity and privilege. Now, it throbbed with unease, a stage frozen between accusation and revelation. The fountains still trickled, but no one heard them. Conversations had died mid-sentence, coffee cups sat untouched. Even the violinist, once the heartbeat of the courtyard, stood motionless, his bow hanging limp at his side. At the center of it all stood Elias Voss, the city's silver-haired titan, a man whose name adorned skyscrapers and charities alike. His tailored jacket was immaculate, but his hands trembled slightly as they rested on the table's edge. He had stared down hostile boardrooms and ruthless investors, yet nothing in his lifetime of power prepared him for this, betrayal dressed in perfume and pearls. Across from him, Celeste Voss tried to hold her mask together. The faint shimmer of sweat on her temple betrayed the calmness of her voice. "Elias," she said through clenched teeth, "please. You're making a scene." A scene. The word lingered, absurdly delicate for what hung between them, life and death, trust and ruin. He didn't respond. His gaze drifted instead toward Noah Raines, the boy who had shouted the words that split his reality apart. The boy looked small under the attention, shoulders hunched, hoodie torn, eyes wide but resolute. He stood beside the table like a ghost that had suddenly become real. "You're sure of what you saw?" Elias asked quietly. Noah nodded. "Yes, sir. She poured it in when you weren't looking." Celeste's composure snapped like glass underfoot. "He's lying," she cried, her voice trembling, raw. "He's just a street rat looking for attention, or a reward. You think this kind of child tells the truth?" But the guests had seen enough to doubt her. Whispers rippled through the patio, uncertain, fearful, hungry for drama. A woman near the window muttered, "She looks nervous." A man in a business suit whispered, "The boy doesn't seem like he's lying." The murmurs tightened around Celeste like a noose. Noah's eyes darted between them, unsure if courage would save him or destroy him. He wasn't used to being believed, the world rarely listened to boys like him. Yet when he looked at Elias, at the mixture of pain and gratitude flickering behind the man's weary eyes, he knew he couldn't step back now. A flash of red and blue washed across the marble patio as a police cruiser pulled up to the curb. Two officers emerged, one tall and quiet, the other broad-shouldered, scanning the scene with steady eyes. The taller officer approached first, removing his sunglasses. "I'm Detective Marion Lowe," she said, voice level but firm. "We received a report of a possible poisoning. Can someone tell me what's going on?" All eyes shifted to Elias. He straightened slowly, gesturing to the untouched bowl of soup still resting in front of him. "This young man," he began, nodding toward Noah, "claims my wife added something to my food." He hesitated, voice tightening. "I'd like the contents tested." Detective Lowe nodded. "Understood." She turned to Celeste. "Ma'am." Celeste folded her arms, chin lifting high. "It's absurd. Look at him." She pointed toward Noah, her tone dripping with indignation. "He's a vagrant. He probably wandered in hoping for a handout, and now he's inventing stories." Lowe crouched slightly to meet Noah's gaze. Her expression softened. "Son, what's your name?" "Noah," he said, voice small. "All right, Noah. Tell me exactly what you saw." He described it again, the small vial, the quick tilt of her wrist, the way she stirred the spoon afterward. Every word came haltingly, as if each memory cost him something to relive. But his details were precise, too precise to be invention. Lowe listened carefully. When he finished, she rose and turned to the second officer. "Bag the soup. Don't touch it bare-handed." The order was calm, procedural, but it hit Celeste like a slap. "You can't be serious," she shouted. "You're taking the word of some homeless brat over me." The officer paused, bowl halfway to the evidence bag. Lowe looked her in the eye. "I'm taking procedure over panic, ma'am." For a moment, no one spoke. The city beyond the café hummed faintly, car horns, gulls, the ocean wind. Life continued, indifferent. Inside the glass-roofed courtyard, time crawled. Elias turned to Celeste, voice low but trembling with disbelief. "Why, Celeste? If he's wrong, then why are you so afraid?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. In that stillness, something inside Elias finally broke, the last string of denial snapping in his chest. He looked at Noah again. The boy's eyes held nothing but sincerity and exhaustion. Elias suddenly saw not a stranger but a mirror of something he'd lost long ago, honesty untainted by greed. Detective Lowe's radio crackled. "Backup's here." Celeste flinched at the sound, her hand tightening around her handbag. The motion didn't go unnoticed. Lowe's gaze followed. "Ma'am, please put the bag down." "What?" "No, this is ridiculous." "Now." Her fingers trembled. She set it down reluctantly. Lowe reached inside and pulled out a small glass vial, half empty. The air in the cafe vanished. Every sound ceased. The boy's breath caught. Elias felt the ground tilt beneath him. Lowe held the vial up to the light. The liquid shimmered faintly blue-green. "We'll test it," she said quietly. Celeste's face drained of color. "That's perfume," she whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced. Elias's voice was barely more than a breath. "You meant to kill me." Her eyes filled, not with remorse, but rage. "I meant to be free," she hissed. "Do you know what it's like living in your shadow? Every day a museum of your power, your name carved into everything, even me." The word struck like a blade. Gasps rose from. Beneath its glass sky, everything had already changed. The sirens faded, swallowed by the noise of afternoon traffic, yet the hush inside Azure Garden Café lingered like smoke after a fire. Tables still gleamed, flowers still perfumed the air, but every guest could feel it, something sacred had been fractured. Wealth, beauty, poise, all had fallen silent before truth. Elias Voss sat motionless. His hands, the same that had signed billion-dollar deals and designed towers of glass, now trembled against a simple porcelain cup. The world he had built, all order and control, felt suddenly fragile. A boy's single shout had pulled one thread, and his life had unraveled in seconds. Across the plaza, cameras flashed. The spectacle of a billionaire's wife arrested for attempted murder was already spreading through the city like wildfire. But inside the cafe, time moved softly. Waiters whispered, avoiding eye contact. The violinist began to pack his instrument, his hands shaking. At the far corner, Noah Raines remained standing. He shifted from foot to foot, uncertain whether to stay or disappear back into the blur of the streets. He didn't belong here, not among marble tables and silk scarves, yet leaving felt wrong, almost ungrateful. Elias finally lifted his gaze. "You're still here," he said quietly. "I didn't know if I should go," Noah replied, voice small. "Didn't want to make more trouble." Elias's lips curved into something almost like a smile. "Trouble is what saved my life today." The boy blinked. No one had ever said his name and saved my life in the same breath. His throat tightened, unsure how to hold that kind of weight. Elias gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Noah hesitated, then slid into the seat, his shoulders stiff. He glanced around, half expecting a waiter to throw him out. But none came. The cafe, moments ago hostile territory, now seemed to tilt slightly in his favor. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the faint hum of the fountain filled the silence. Then Elias exhaled, a sound that carried both exhaustion and release. "She wore that mask well," he murmured, half to himself. "I thought I'd mastered the art of seeing through people, but maybe I stopped looking." Noah didn't answer. He watched the old man's eyes, gray, distant, yet vulnerable in a way he'd never imagined rich people could be. The man who owned half the skyline now looked like someone who had lost his footing on solid ground. Elias turned to him. "You ever trust the wrong person, Noah?" The boy looked down at his hands, at the grime that years on the street had left behind. "Yeah," he said softly. "A few times. Sometimes you don't know till it's too late. Sometimes, you know, and you trust them anyway. 'Cause you need someone." Elias nodded slowly. The truth in the boy's words pierced deeper than any courtroom verdict. "Yes," he whispered, "because you need someone." For the first time that day, the billionaire and the boy were equals, not in wealth, but in hurt. The detective returned briefly, her voice measured. "Mr. Voss, the vial will go to the lab. We'll contact you once results are confirmed. You should probably have someone escort you home." Elias nodded in thanks. "And the boy?" "He's free to go," Lowe said. "If you'd like to give a statement, we can take it at the station." Noah shook his head quickly. I don't want no cops. I just wanna be gone." Lowe studied him, then offered a small nod. "You did a brave thing, son. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She left, the doors closing behind her with a whisper of finality. The cafe's crowd began to disperse. But Elias remained, staring at the untouched bowl before him, the poison that hadn't been tasted. He pushed it away with a quiet clink. "She would have watched me eat it," he said. "Smiled while I died." Noah shifted uneasily. "I'm sorry, sir." "Don't be." Elias's voice steadied. "You didn't break anything that wasn't already cracking. You only showed me where the fractures were." He reached into his jacket and placed a sleek black wallet on the table. Inside, among credit cards and metal pens, was a single business card, the one he'd given earlier. "The address on there," he said, "isn't just an office. It's where my foundation runs outreach for homeless youth. Tonight you'll sleep there. Tomorrow we'll talk about school, if you want." Noah's eyes widened. "School? For me?" "For you," Elias confirmed. "If you can shout truth in a room full of liars, you can learn anything." The boy's lips parted but no words came. For a heartbeat, he feared it was a trick. He'd known charity that came with strings, kindness that expired by morning. Yet Elias's tone was different, steady, unhurried, certain. He nodded slowly. "Okay. I'll go." Outside, the late-day sun began to slide toward the horizon, spilling golden light through the cafe's glass canopy. Dust motes drifted like tiny planets in orbit around the two figures, one seasoned by power, the other shaped by hunger. The world beyond kept spinning, but within those walls, something quiet and irreversible had begun. Elias signaled for the waiter. "Bring 2 soups," he said. "Fresh." The young server hesitated, eyes flicking to Noah, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Minutes later, steam rose again between them, the faint scent of herbs softening the air. Elias waited until Noah took the first cautious spoonful. "Better?" The boy nodded, warmth flooding his chest for the first time in days. It's real good. Then that's our first deal, Elias said. You eat, and I listen. Tell me about your life. Noah hesitated, spoon halfway to his lips. Ain't much to tell. Try me. So he did, haltingly at first, then in small, nervous bursts. He spoke of shelters that smelled of bleach and fear, of nights beneath bridges counting headlights instead of stars. He spoke of a mother who'd died when he was 6, of a father who'd vanished before that. He spoke of learning to keep quiet, to stay unseen. When he finished, Elias's eyes glistened. He didn't interrupt or offer pity. He simply said, "You've survived more than most men I've known. You don't owe anyone silence anymore." The words hit Noah deeper than hunger ever had. No lecture, no sermon, just truth offered without condition. Outside, the city's lights flickered to life, reflections rippling across the bay. The world resumed its rhythm, unaware that a new story had begun, one born from a shattered mask and a boy's courage. As they left the café together, the waiter watched them go, the billionaire walking slowly beside the child who had saved him. No security detail, no headlines, no spectacle, just two lives crossing in the golden haze of evening. And as the door swung shut, the sign above the entrance caught the last light of day, its letters glowing faintly like a benediction. Azure Garden Café. Where truth had broken wealth, and kindness had quietly taken its place. The night pressed gently against the glass walls of the Azure Garden Café, its once brilliant sky now washed in indigo and gold. A thin drizzle misted the streets, the city lights bled through it like watercolor. Inside, the echoes of the afternoon still lingered, whispers of disbelief, the metallic click of handcuffs, a bowl of soup cooling untouched. Elias Voss stood at the window long after everyone had gone. The faint reflection that stared back at him no longer looked like a man of industry but like an aging stranger who had spent too many years trusting the wrong smile. Behind him, the young boy sat quietly, watching him the way a child watches the tide, unsure if it will return or drown him. You ever taste betrayal, Noah? Elias asked, voice low, heavy. Noah frowned. Taste it? Elias turned from the window, his silhouette framed in neon light. It's bitter. It coats everything you thought was sweet. He moved to the table, touched the rim of the abandoned soup bowl as though testing a wound. It's in the food, in the air, even in your own breath. And the worst part, it's familiar. Because the person who poisons you, they always know what you love. Noah said nothing. He had seen betrayal in smaller, crueler forms, a friend who stole his blanket, a promise of shelter that ended in violence. But this man's grief was different, quieter, deeper, more civilized but no less raw. I don't know what she gave you, sir, Noah said softly, but it don't matter now. She's gone. Elias shook his head. Gone, yes. But the echo remains. You can arrest a person, not their absence. The old man sank into the chair opposite him. For the first time since the chaos, his composure cracked completely. His hands covered his face, the mighty founder of Voss Architectural Group simply wept. Noah froze. He had never seen a rich man cry. It unsettled him, not out of judgment but out of awe, proof that pain didn't care about money. Hesitantly, he reached across the table and pushed the untouched bread toward Elias. You should eat something. You look like you ain't breathed since it happened. Elias laughed faintly between tears. I suppose I haven't. He tore a small piece, chewed mechanically, then stopped mid-bite. It's strange, he murmured. I built towers to touch the sky, yet my life almost ended because I stopped looking at what was right in front of me. The boy's stomach growled softly, breaking the heaviness. Elias glanced up, then signaled to the waiter still wiping down counters. "Bring him something warm," he said. "Anything he wants." Minutes later, a bowl of stew arrived, fragrant and steaming. Noah ate quickly at first, then slower, savoring each mouthful as if memorizing it. Elias watched with a faint smile, the kind that hides heartbreak behind gratitude. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" Elias asked. Noah shook his head. "Nowhere that don't get locked after dark." "Then you'll come with me." Noah's spoon halted. "Sir, I can't." "You can," Elias said gently. "And you will. You saved me from poison. The least I can do is save you from rain." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, a cable car bell chimed in the distance, echoing like a benediction through the wet night. They left the cafe together under one umbrella, an unlikely pair moving through a city that barely noticed. Elias's limousine waited by the curb, a sleek shadow among puddles. Noah hesitated before climbing in, his reflection warped in the black paint. He had ridden in trucks, buses, even police vans, but never anything like this. Inside, the air smelled of leather and cedar. The seats swallowed him whole. Through the tinted glass, neon lights streaked like comets. He pressed a hand to the window, half expecting to wake up in the morning under the bridge again. Elias watched him quietly. "When I was your age," he said, "I thought money could protect you from pain. Turns out it only changes its language." Noah turned toward him. "Then why'd you keep making it?" Elias smiled sadly. "Because I mistook building for healing. I thought if I made the world beautiful enough, I'd stop feeling broken myself." He looked out at the skyline, his skyline, glittering against the bay. "I was wrong." They arrived at a gated residence on Telegraph Hill. The mansion loomed behind manicured hedges and floodlit terraces, every window glowing like a promise. As the gates opened, Noah's breath caught. The driveway alone was longer than any street he'd ever called home. The butler opened the door, blinking in surprise at the sight of the drenched boy. Elias waved off his question. "Prepare a room. Something warm. And food." When the staff had gone, Elias turned back to Noah. "You'll stay here until we figure out what's next. The police may call you for a statement, but beyond that, this house is yours as long as you need it." Noah looked down, clutching his sleeves. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Elias's reply came slowly. "Because today you reminded me who I used to be, before money made me deaf to small voices." He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You saw what others ignored. Don't ever lose that." Upstairs, the guest room glowed softly with lamplight. A tray of food waited beside a folded blanket. Noah stood in the doorway, overwhelmed. His throat ached, not from hunger now, but from the unfamiliar weight of safety. In his own suite across the hall, Elias stood by the balcony, the city stretching below. He could still hear Celeste's voice, her confession, her fury, the words "I wanted to be free." Freedom, he thought, could be cruel when chased without love. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at it a long while before drinking. Trust, like glass, once broken, could never be invisible again. Yet somewhere under this same roof, a boy slept for the first time on clean sheets. Maybe redemption began in small mercies. Down the hall, Noah lay awake, listening to the hum of rain against the windows. For the first time. In years, he wasn't cold. He whispered into the dark, unsure if anyone could hear, "Thanks." And in another room, Elias whispered the same word to the night. Two voices, worlds apart, yet bound by one truth. Betrayal could poison the soul, but kindness was the antidote that still tasted pure. Morning came quietly over Telegraph Hill. Mist clung to the bay, softening the sharp edges of the skyline that bore Elias Voss's name in steel and glass. Inside the mansion, everything gleamed, marble, brass, polished wood, but for the first time in decades, its owner did not feel larger than his surroundings. He simply felt human. Elias stood on the balcony, wrapped in a wool robe, watching the fog roll past the Golden Gate. He hadn't slept. Betrayal leaves its taste long after the poison is gone. Yet somewhere in the house, a boy was sleeping safely for the first time in years. That thought, fragile as it was, steadied him. Down the corridor, Noah Rains stirred beneath a thick blanket. The sheets were softer than anything he'd known. For a second he forgot where he was, then the scent of coffee and toast drifted under the door, and the memory of last night returned, sirens, handcuffs, and the stranger who had called him brave. He dressed awkwardly in the clothes a maid had left, a plain gray hoodie, washed and warm, and followed the smell of breakfast. He stopped at the dining room's threshold, uncertain if he was allowed inside. Elias looked up from a newspaper he wasn't really reading. "Come in, Noah," he said, voice gentle but certain. "Hungry?" The boy nodded. "Good," Elias continued. "Because I've decided that today we start with full stomachs and empty excuses." Noah grinned a little. "Sounds fair." They ate together in silence at first, the billionaire and the boy who had once watched him through a fence. Outside, gulls wheeled above the bay. Inside, the clink of cutlery felt almost intimate. When they were done, Elias pushed aside his plate. "I made some calls," he said. "There's a place downtown, the Harbor Youth Program. They help kids finish school, teach them skills, find apartments. I'm one of their donors, but I've never set foot inside. That changes today. You and I are going there." Noah froze mid-sip of juice. "Me? Why?" "Because you saved a man yesterday," Elias replied. "Now you'll learn how to save yourself." The boy blinked, unsure how to answer. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay." The drive down the hill was quiet, the city waking around them, vendors opening stalls, joggers moving through the fog, newspapers landing on doorsteps like folded secrets. Elias watched the streets with new eyes. For decades he had seen San Francisco as property lines and profit zones. Now he saw it as 1,000 small lives trying to survive. At a stoplight, Noah leaned forward, pressing his palms to the glass. "That corner," he murmured. "That's where I used to sleep. Behind that bakery dumpster. They tossed bread every night after closing." Elias followed his gaze. The alley was narrow, shadowed, almost invisible to the casual passerby. He felt a twist of guilt. His towers had cast long shadows on boys like this one. "You won't sleep there again," he said quietly. They reached the harbor center, a renovated warehouse that smelled of paint and hope. Children in donated clothes played basketball in the courtyard, volunteers handed out breakfast burritos. The laughter echoed off the brick walls, humble but alive. Elias stepped out first, greeted by startled staff. "Mr. Voss," one of them asked, eyes wide. "You've never actually visited." "I have that problem," he said softly. "I fund things I've never felt." He introduced Noah. The boy's posture stiffened under the sudden attention, but Elias rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This one," he said, "reminded me why places like this exist." A young counselor led Noah to a group inside. Elias watched him go, nervous at first, then slowly drawn into conversation, laughter breaking through like sunlight. For the first time since Celeste's arrest, something warm moved in Elias's chest. Redemption, perhaps, beginning in the smallest of ways. Later that afternoon, they walked along Pier 7, gulls circling overhead. The water slapped rhythmically against the pilings. Elias handed Noah a paper bag filled with fresh pastries. "For tonight," he said. "You sure you don't want one? I've had enough sugar for a lifetime." They laughed, a sound too easy, almost foreign. Noah grew serious after a while. "You think she really wanted to kill you? Your wife?" Elias took a moment before answering. "I think she wanted freedom more than love. Sometimes people believe the only way out of a cage is to burn it down, even if they built it themselves." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing the thought. "Guess you gotta choose what you build, huh?" "Yes," Elias said. "And who you let inside." They stopped at the edge of the pier. The wind whipped through their clothes, the bay glittered like molten silver. Elias placed a hand on the railing, the cold metal grounding him. "Do you know why I became an architect, Noah? 'Cause you liked buildings. Because I wanted to prove that broken things could hold weight." He looked down at the boy beside him. "I forgot that people need rebuilding too." Noah stared out at the horizon. "You're doing it now." Elias smiled faintly. "Maybe. But you started it." Evening fell. Back at the mansion, the staff moved quietly, sensing a change in their employer. Elias no longer barked orders, he asked. He no longer dined alone. At the long marble table, 2 plates waited every night, one set small, with a folded napkin shaped into a tiny house. When the news broke the next morning, Billionaire's wife charged with attempted murder, saved by homeless boy, calls poured in. Reporters, lawyers, politicians. Elias refused them all. Instead, he wrote one statement, short and unadorned. "Courage comes from those who have nothing left to lose." Yesterday, a boy named Noah reminded me that truth still lives among the forgotten. I intend to spend what remains of my life making sure they are forgotten no more. The message went viral. Donations to harbor youth tripled overnight. But what mattered most was simpler. Every morning, Elias and Noah walked together to the café on the corner, ordered 2 soups, and shared them quietly. The billionaire no longer dined above the world. He ate among it, beside the boy who had saved him from silence. And as dawn spread over the bay, painting the water in shades of mercy, both understood something that neither wealth nor hunger had ever taught them. Redemption isn't bought or begged for. It's built, one act of courage, one shared meal, one new day at a time. Spring arrived early that year, rolling over San Francisco in a wash of salt air and cherry blossoms. The city that once felt indifferent now hummed with a strange new rhythm, quiet conversations about a boy and a billionaire whose paths had collided beneath a glass sky. The story had moved beyond news headlines. It had become a parable whispered between strangers on trains, in classrooms, and in boardrooms that had forgotten compassion. The foundation. At the top of Telegraph Hill, the gates of the Voss estate opened one morning not for investors or dignitaries but for carpenters, painters, and volunteers. The marble foyer filled with the echo of hammers and laughter as Elias watched crews transform the unused east wing into something entirely new, dormitories, classrooms, and a courtyard garden filled with wildflowers. A bronze plaque was mounted above the entrance. The Voice Project. For those who dared to speak when silence was easier. Noah stood beside Elias as it was unveiled. His hoodie was gone, in its place a clean white shirt and scuffed sneakers that still carried the memory of the streets. He stared at the plaque for a long time, tracing the engraved words with his fingers. "It's really happening," he whispered. Elias nodded. "It's only the beginning. You gave it a name, now we'll give it life." The ripple within weeks, donations poured in, some large, others scribbled on envelopes containing $5 and a note that read, "For the boy who shouted." Journalists visited, expecting to find a publicity stunt, but left humbled after seeing what the place had become. By June, the Voice Project had taken in 27 kids. They learned carpentry, coding, and music. They learned how to hold a fork properly and, more importantly, how to hold their heads high. Noah spent his afternoons teaching new arrivals how to write their names in neat block letters. He told them, "Your name matters. Even if no one says it right, it still belongs to you." Elias spent his mornings among them, sleeves rolled up, blueprints spread across tables. The man who once built skyscrapers now knelt beside children, showing them how to measure a wooden frame. Every nail hammered into place felt like penance, every laugh a prayer answered. The return to the café. One bright afternoon, they returned to the Azure Garden Café. It had changed too. The same waiters who once whispered about scandal now greeted them with warm smiles. The manager had placed a framed newspaper clipping by the door, "Homeless boy saves billionaire's life." They took their old table, sunlight slanting through the glass ceiling. 2 bowls of soup arrived, steaming, fragrant, harmless. Elias lifted his spoon, then paused. "Do you realize," he said softly, "that this table started everything?" Noah smirked. "Guess that means we gotta tip big." They laughed, and for the first time, it wasn't laughter that hid pain. It was release. The outreach. Later that month, Elias held a press conference in the newly opened courtyard. Cameras flashed, but his speech was brief. "Money builds walls," he said, "but courage builds bridges. The Voice Project will not ask where you came from, only where you wish to go." Noah stood behind him, trying to disappear from the spotlight, but when Elias gestured for him to step forward, the crowd erupted in applause. His voice shook when he spoke. "I just didn't want someone to get hurt. I never thought anyone would listen. But now I know, when you tell the truth, you don't speak alone. Somebody always hears." That clip played on evening news across the country. Letters arrived from children who'd seen the story, some from shelters, some from mansions. They all said the same thing in different words: "You made me believe I matter." The quiet moments. At night, when the mansion turned foundation finally fell silent, Elias and Noah would sit in the courtyard. The city glittered below, each light a tiny heartbeat. "You think people can really change?" Noah asked one evening. Elias looked at him, the boy who had dragged him back from the edge of death and loneliness. "I don't think they can," he said. "I know they can. I'm looking at proof." Noah smiled, his face soft in the lamplight. "Guess we both got second chances, huh?" "Second, third, and however many it takes," Elias said. "That's what hope is, permission to begin again." The letter. Weeks later, a letter arrived from the city jail. It was from Elias Voss. The handwriting was elegant but trembled. "Elias. I watch the news from a gray room that smells of bleach. You built a home for lost children, and I can't decide if that makes you merciful or cruel. I wanted freedom, but not like this. Maybe someday, when I am smaller inside, I'll be grateful you survived. Until then, live well. Elias folded the letter without anger. Even remorse, he said quietly, is a kind of beginning. He burned it in the fireplace, the smoke rising like a final prayer. The celebration. On the first anniversary of the Voice Project, the courtyard overflowed. Formerly homeless kids wore suits and dresses borrowed from volunteers. The mayor cut the ribbon for a new workshop wing, but it was Noah's short speech that silenced the crowd. A year ago, I yelled, "Don't eat that." Today, I want to say, don't forget this. If somebody needs help, speak up. You never know who you'll save, maybe even yourself. Applause thundered. Elias, standing behind him, wiped his eyes without shame. The lesson. When the night ended and guests drifted away, Elias placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. "You've built more than I ever did," he said. Noah looked up at him, eyes shining. "We built it together." And as the fog rolled once more across the bay, softening the lights of the city, the words on the foundation's plaque seemed to glow. For those who dared to speak when silence was easier. Because courage, once born, never truly belongs to one person. It ripples outward, turning glass towers into beacons, and forgotten boys into keepers of hope. A full year had passed since that trembling voice shattered the silence of the Azure Garden Café, a single shout that rewrote 2 lives. And now, on this bright spring morning, the city of San Francisco stirred awake to witness something rare, redemption made visible. A sky reborn. The bay was wrapped in silver light. Seagulls traced wide arcs over the water as the wind carried the scent of rain and blossoms uphill toward the Voice Project, which now stood complete. Where once stood the cold, gated mansion of Elias Voss, there now rose a haven of color and laughter. Children hurried across the courtyard with paint-stained hands, teachers called attendance beneath a canopy of vines, and sunlight streamed through the new glass atrium that replaced the old ballroom ceiling. Elias watched from the balcony, cane in hand, a soft smile resting on his face. His health had grown frailier, but his spirit glowed stronger than ever. The air no longer smelled of marble polish and loneliness, it smelled of paper, sawdust, and hope. Below him, Noah Raines, now 15, was directing a group of volunteers unloading supplies from a truck. He wore a navy shirt with the Voice Project logo printed across it, his first uniform. The boy who had once whispered for scraps now gave orders with quiet confidence, his laughter carrying across the courtyard like music. The anniversary gathering. By noon, the gates opened to the public. Reporters gathered outside, families filled the gardens. A stage had been built beneath the oak trees, draped with banners that read 1 year of courage. When Elias appeared, the crowd fell silent. He leaned on the podium, gazing over faces of every color, age, and story. Exactly 1 year ago, he began, voice steady despite the emotion tightening it, "A stranger saved my life. But what he really saved was my soul." He gestured toward Noah, who stood to the side, bashful but smiling. He reminded me that truth spoken in fear is still truth, and that sometimes, the smallest voice can move mountains of silence. Applause swelled, echoing off the nearby hills. Cameras flashed, yet the moment felt intimate, human. Elias continued, "This place is not mine. It belongs to every child who refuses to disappear, every person who still believes kindness can rebuild what cruelty has broken. I named it the Voice Project because I want every echo that starts here to never stop." When he finished, Noah stepped forward to speak. He no longer shook when handed the microphone. His eyes found Elias in the front row, and the world seemed to slow around him. "I didn't think I'd ever belong anywhere," Noah said. But then someone listened. And when people listen, the world changes. He paused, letting the quiet hold him for a heartbeat. "I used to think courage meant not being scared. Now I know it means being scared and doing the right thing anyway." The crowd rose to their feet. The return. Later that afternoon, after the applause and speeches, Elias and Noah walked side by side down to the waterfront, the same pier they had visited that first week after the arrest. The tide was low, gulls squabbling over bread crumbs. A light drizzle began, misting their hair. Elias stopped where the wooden railing met the sea. "Funny," he said, "how the storms that once nearly drown us can become the ones that clear our sky." Noah looked up at him. "You think the storm's over?" Elias smiled. "No. Storms never end. But light always finds a way back." He reached into his coat and handed Noah a folded envelope. Inside was a letter written on heavy paper bearing the Voss Company seal. "What's this?" Noah asked. "Your scholarship," Elias replied. "Architecture school, if you want it. Or journalism, or law, whatever you choose. It's time you build something of your own." The boy's breath caught. "You don't have to." "I do," Elias interrupted softly. "Because the world needs what's inside you. The honesty, the nerve. I can't buy that, but I can help it grow." Noah looked out over the bay, eyes glistening. "Then I'll make you proud." "You already have," Elias said. The farewell. A week later, Elias collapsed quietly in his study. The doctor said his heart had simply given out, not from grief, but from having finally laid its burdens down. The news spread through the city like the tolling of a bell. When the memorial service was held, hundreds gathered, business leaders, construction workers, students, and every child from the Voice Project. But it was Noah who spoke last. Dressed in a simple black suit, he stood before the crowd, holding back tears. "Mr. Voss used to say that courage builds bridges," he began. "He built one between two worlds, between power and compassion, between silence and voice. He didn't just give me a home, he gave me a purpose." He looked toward the sky, where sunlight broke through rain clouds, scattering gold across the courtyard. "He told me once that light always finds its way back. So if you're listening, Mr. Voss, the light's here. You left it with us." No one clapped, they simply stood, heads bowed, letting the quiet carry the meaning. Legacy. Months passed. The Voice Project expanded to 3 cities. Its walls were covered with murals, faces of children who once lived in shadow, now painted in brilliant color. A new wing was named the Voss Learning Hall, its entrance lined with the words Elias had spoken at his final anniversary, "Truth spoken in fear is still truth." At night, Noah would sometimes visit the pier alone. He'd sit where Elias had stood, sketchbook in hand, designing buildings that looked less like fortresses and more like open hands. He no longer saw himself as the boy who shouted, "Don't eat that." He was the young man who proved that one voice could feed the world. The light after the storm. On the first anniversary of Elias's passing, the city dimmed its skyline for 1 minute. The glass towers he had built reflected the last blush of sunset, pink, gold, and silver, a skyline that shimmered not with wealth, but with remembrance. Inside the courtyard of the Voice Project, Noah lit a single lantern and released it into the sky. The flame wavered, caught the wind, and began to rise. All around him, others followed, hundreds of lights lifting into the night, a constellation of gratitude ascending above the city. As they drifted upward, Noah whispered the words that had carried him from that cafe railing to this moment of grace. Kindness is louder than fear. And light always finds its way home. The lanterns floated toward the heavens until they were indistinguishable from the stars, a sky reborn by one boy's courage and one man's redemption.